Glad to see you here again. This is Module 6, and we're going to talk about colonial pedagogy. By looking at how colonial pedagogies attribute power and privilege, we can reclaim our teaching and learning. By recognizing materials and pedagogies such as the guide, we can also address their harms. So, in understanding the guide as a hegemonic settler making tool, its teaching and distribution is critical to maintaining the settler colonial narrative. The guide and citizenship mirror the residential school model of language requirements and acculturation. The linguistic legacy of residential schools further demonstrates how cultural superiority and ethnic prejudice are ingrained in systemic policies for assimilation. The residential schooling system identified pedagogy as the central mechanism of colonial assimilation. As colonial pedagogies offer assimilative governmental mandates, they are forced and enforced to erase identity and representation. So, coercive instruction is elemental to colonial pedagogy. Compulsory attendance, classroom management, learning outcomes, and standardized assessment control the students' bodies. As a mode of socializing strict hierarchies, authority and use of force discipline the process of acculturation as civilization becoming a naturalized and normalized condition. The coercion for newcomers to learn language and reproduce the guide to obtain citizenship is for the process of acculturation. It requires reproduction of the settler colonial narrative of the guide. In colonial pedagogy, the hidden curriculum assists in coercion through language frameworks to idealize responsible Canadians, citizens through Eurocentric values. The guide teaches settler colonial narratives and implicitly in the hidden curriculum and explicitly through imagery and text. So the process of teaching and learning of the guide is best articulated by Paulo Freire's banking concept of education. Sometimes it's referred to as banking system of education. As a colonial pedagogy, the teacher is the active participant, imparting knowledge, and learners are the passive participants receiving the knowledge. As the guide informs tests, the knowledge in the guide is transmitted from teacher to student. The banking concept of education is critical to the settler colonial apparatus as it ensures learners do not participate in the creation of knowledge. They must accept the knowledge as it is given to them. The process trains learners to mirror the same methodology beyond their educational environments. They will not question authorities. They accept the words of the authority as the holder of the knowledge. Subverting opinions, critical thinking, knowledge creation, and questioning discourse are forbidden. The nature of knowledge delivery in colonial pedagogy is to not allow anyone to question its narratives. Some learners will attempt to question the narratives. The discourse of the master ensures learners reproduce the knowledge as the teacher has inscribed the knowledge. Different levels of harm associated with discourse of the master are the least harm occurs when learners do not question the knowledge. But when a learner questions the knowledge and the authority demands the learner to reproduce the knowledge as the authority has ascribed it, the learner is irrevocably harmed. When the teacher or government institution denies the learner's question and silences them, the harm is existential, such as with the guide and the citizenship test. Colonial pedagogy and high-stakes assessments such as the guide and citizenship test function together. Therefore, colonial pedagogy and colonial curricula operate within the content of the curricula and the disciplinary procedures that accompany its instruction in regard to what is taught and how it is taught. Humans are born into language, which is inherent to the formation of their subjectivity. Morality, as a precursor to repression and elemental to our subjectivity, operates within the language system, becoming our conscious and unconscious. Discourse and language attribution become inscribed on the body to be materially embodied, particularly in relation to oppressive language. An example connected to the guide would be discourse that sustains Islamophobia, Muslim equating to violent, controlling, and terroristic, cultural barbaric practices, which becomes normalized in social and language structures. Islamophobia in postmodern racism has nothing to do with Islam or Muslims. It is about the conceptual Muslim, an imaginary other of the Euro American neoliberal self. Representative of violence and terrorism, the conceptual Muslim ideologically becomes the threat to the Eurocentric civilization, extending beyond the conceptual Muslim through the master morality paradigm of modernity. Good Muslims are modern, secular, and westernized, and bad Muslims are doctrinal, anti-modern, and virulent. Therefore, liberation praxis of the functionality of oppressive language furthers its uses of reflection for understanding material effects. Therefore, liberatory practices become enacted through liberatory discourses. But the hidden curriculum implicitly functions. It denotes lessons not formally taught. The hidden curriculum transmits implicit messages of unstated beliefs, values, and behavioral norms in an underlying structure of meaning and formal content. There are three traditions in educational theory that denote the hidden curriculum. The tradition that functions in the guide is radical critical view. It recognizes relationships between political ideologies, social practice of learning, and theory through the relationship of economic and cultural reproduction. It also takes place under the political and cultural nature of schooling. In failing to recognize the hidden curriculum, multicultural education becomes an appropriated hegemonic device. It secures roles of power and leadership for dominant groups in society by distinguishing ideology as education. Henri Giroux, or I should say Henry Giroux, unmasks neoconservative and neoliberal ideologies in the hidden curriculum that are synonymous with the stripping of equality, social justice, and freedom. While some prospective citizenship test takers may resist the learning process, they understand that they must master the guide to pass the citizenship test. Therefore, the guide exercises power over test takers to accept and reproduce the guide's neoconservative values, identity, and beliefs. Other traditions of the hidden curriculum in the guide also implicitly present social order as a consensual relationship of school and society. Learners are passive recipients of the hidden curriculum messaging that is intended to undermine social inequalities. The functionalist sociological process also implicitly teaches meritocracy. If one works hard, one will achieve success. The guide says that if prospective citizens study it only, they have the possibility to pass the test. To reinforce the hidden curriculum and the banking concept of education, the discourse of the master entrenches the relationship of the educator and learner, using the essential human needs of recognition and identity. As an educator, a teacher must enable students to enhance their identities to handle world differences in their educational experiences. The discourse of the master enforces the dynamic of the teacher offering themselves to the students as a model for emulation and an object that they must also desire. The students accept the teacher as the master having the truth. By aligning the student's desire to the figure of the teacher, the students do as the teacher privileges them. By giving power to the teacher dismisses anything outside of the prescribed content, harming the students' identities. Students learn what the master wants and how the master wants it delivered. Students focus on performing the identity to accord value to the canon, even when it is untrue, and they understand it as untrue. So, an activity for this section is to read this article, Citizenship Guide Remains Outdated in its Simplistic Account of Indigenous History, critics say, and to then answer these questions. How did studying the guide impact new citizen Nazan in Mogadami? What did Mogadami notice in the guide? How does the guide's continued presence impact everyone? And can you connect these colonial pedagogies to the guide and the test? Do they impede reconciliation? So, I want to thank you again for being here. The next module is actually on critical pedagogy, where we're really getting into how we can um, work with this guide because the learners need the guide. They need to reproduce the guide to get their citizenship. So, how we can work with this guide and really support our learners. Um, and of course, as always, here's the references for this section and a reminder that there are hyperlinks to public publication, the publication of these resources. All right, so I'll see you in module 7.